I'm Caleb Jarreau, that's Eric Woods, and we are coming to you from Ben Hill Griffin Stadium. The Vols just played, lost 29-16 to Florida to begin SEC play. Not the performance anybody was expecting, and not the performance Josh Heupel and his team certainly wanted. Eric, there's a lot to look at here. What kind of stands out most to you?
I mean, the thing that stood out the most to me was the fact that they got off to almost a dream start offensively. I mean, the biggest thing from the past two games was slow starts offensively, and a lot of that was attributed to not opening up the playbook, and for a minute it looked true, and then for the rest of the first half, I want to say 3 punts and an interception were the remaining drives for Tennessee. And then defensively, started out decent, not great, but I mean you got them down to plus territory, and then they missed a field goal, and that was supposed to be a big momentum shift, but it just wasn't. So, yeah. Yeah,
and you talk about that ideal start. I mean, Joe Milton threw a deep ball to square right where we're standing, and then chipped in an 11-yard touchdown pass to Ramel Keaton. It took the air out of the stadium for a second, put the Vols on the board. Unfortunately, that was their only touchdown of the game. And I want to say probably not even 10 minutes of game time later, the press box was shaking with how loud it was in here.
Yep.
You couldn't even hear yourself think. I mean, procedural penalties, 10 penalties tonight, and they always came at inopportune times. I mean, you get behind the chains before you can even start. You come out on first down. And something that stood out to me is if you didn't have a penalty or a delay of game, you're calling timeout out of a commercial, out of a TV timeout. Not the best way to play football, not the best way to execute. On the defensive side, I think we saw probably the worst tackling that this team has shown all season. You had Aaron Beasley, who did Aaron Beasley things, continued to wrap up. But some of those DBs are just lowering shoulders, and that might work against Austin Peay. But when you have Trevor Etienne, who ran for a career-high 172 yards tonight, those shoulder tackles not wrapping up, that doesn't play in the SEC.
No. And, I mean, you look at him, and Trevor Etienne's what, like 6, maybe like 5'11", 6 foot, like 200-plus pounds. He looks big on the field, and, I mean, like you said, if you try and put him on your shoulder, he's going to knock you down, and you saw that with Kamal Haddon on that 62-yard run that pretty much started all the momentum swing for Florida. So, I mean, you somewhat stopped him on the first drive, but then you come back, you score, you have momentum, and then Trevor Etienne breaks free, and then Kamal Haddon, he was the only one there for the tackle. So, and then you go in and he puts the shoulder down, bounces right off, and then he's still up, but he just falls down, and Trevor Etienne goes the whole way. So, I mean, that was the biggest momentum shift in the game, and I think a lot of things could have been negated had that play not happened.
Yeah, and you talk about wrapping up. It felt like that was a trend all night. Wide receivers, running backs. Montreal Johnson had a good night as well for Florida. It wasn't as much as the defensive front not playing well. It was when they're in the spot, they didn't wrap up, didn't make the play. Swinging over to the offensive side, Joe Milton finished the night 20 of 34 passing with 287 yards. His first interception as a Tennessee Volunteer and 2 touchdowns. Now that interception, yes, it was a bad decision, but he also had a 400-pound Desmond Watson bearing down on him. So he threw it straight up, gets intercepted, basically like returning a punt. How much of tonight can be attributed to Milton, and how much do you chalk up to his offensive line did no favors for him tonight?
I mean, it's a little tough because, yes, the quarterback starts and finishes the game. He kind of decides how everything goes, but I mean, he was running a lot, and he was only sacked. I think he was only sacked once, but I mean, he was running a lot, forced him to make some off-balance throws, and that plays a big part. And it's not like he's got some legs, but it's not like he's not gonna extend plays like that. So yeah, I mean, it's a little bit on both. It's a little bit on both.
I really think the offensive line tonight played probably as poorly as we've seen this season, combined with maybe a couple Milton mistakes kind of compiled into what we saw tonight. I mean, lots of procedural penalties, false starts. There was one play where everybody except the center moved. So that can be contributed to our surroundings. We're in one of the loudest stadiums in the country, but also that's stuff that you expect to work on in practice. Those guys are not freshmen on the offensive line. That's stuff you expect them to execute. And speaking of execution and leadership, Where does this team go from here? What do you think is next for Tennessee? I mean, we talked to Aaron Beasley tonight. We talked to Joe Milton. Joe Milton handled himself very well in the presser.
Oh, yeah.
Talked about how leaders need to step up and talk. But there was a leadership meeting on Sunday that the players talked about, and we saw what we got tonight.
Yeah.
So where do you think this team needs to go? What leaders need to step up? What do you see happening in the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that this game has no. It obviously has an impact on their season, but it doesn't define it. I didn't expect it to be an easy game. I predicted them to win, but it also wasn't my most confident pick. So you come in the Swamp, a place you haven't won in 20 years since 2003, and bad things might happen, especially like we talked about earlier. The crowd had a chance to get involved in the game, so I mean, I don't think the loss itself is bad. The first half was really bad, I'll say that, but I mean, it's a night game against one of the loudest SEC stadiums, like you said. So I mean, where they go from here, I don't know. Obviously, it starts, like Heupel said in this press conference, it starts tomorrow, and it starts in the practice field. I don't think tonight was all bad. Like we said earlier, the first drive was really good. 4 drives after that, not so good. But then they came out, first possession, scored a field goal, and then they had some other opportunities of where they were down on the 20-yard line. They went for it on 4th down. They didn't want to settle for a field goal. So there was things like that, and then you had the 55-yarder to Brew McCoy. There was. When you scrape off all the bad, there was a little bit of good that can be expanded on. You saw Joe Milton get comfortable and look really solid. So yeah, that's the biggest thing is I think take the good and leave the bad here.
Yeah, and I mean we saw the SEC today. Georgia struggled against a very bad team in South Carolina. South Carolina, not the best team. Florida's in the SEC East. I mean, you have Alabama on the schedule, and they barely handled the University of South Florida, rolling through 2 quarterbacks, not even playing the starter. They played the first 2 games. So the SEC is wide open. More than likely, the champion will probably have a loss somewhere. I mean, that's just the way it's shaping out right now. These teams do not look to be up to par as they were in the past. But this now means there's no mistakes in the future. You can't drop another SEC game. Luckily, Tennessee has this week to prepare, and then you have a UTSA tune-up game at home. Try to just get your confidence back, get your feet back under you, and then roll back into SEC play. But I mean, some of the stuff we saw tonight, you can assume Kirby Smart's watching on film. You know, Shane Beamer's watching on film, and he's going to do the same thing. Whatever Florida did tonight to make it so hard on Tennessee, they're going to do the same thing and try to make it tough. Yeah. So with all that being said, Eric, I'm Caleb. You're Eric. This is The Swamp, and we will see y'all next week in Neyland.